Funding for In the Garden is provided by UNC TV members and by academic programs and North Carolina Cooperative Extension. Both are members of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at North Carolina State University.
Hi, and welcome to In the Garden. I'm Bryce Lane. And folks, today's show is a continuation from last week, devoted entirely to planting woody trees and shrubs. We're going to talk about some new ideas relative to planting. Let's stop thinking about the whole, and maybe we need to be thinking about the whole bed, or the plant bed, and the approach that we take to planting those particular plants. You remember we talked about B&B and container grown and bare root. What specific techniques do we need to use to plant each one of those? All that and more. We're going to talk about staking and guying and how to go about doing that correctly for larger trees that are in the landscape. It's another day devoted entirely to planting. You know, often people ask me in the dead of summer if it's okay to plant a tree or a shrub. And I tell them, it's okay to plant plants as long as you can work the ground. It's all right. Now granted, there are some times of the year where it's better to plant than others. And that brings me to this topic here. We want to discuss when is the best time to plant. Now there are two basic seasons that are identified as the best time, the fall and the spring. What I'd like to do is talk about what the advantages and disadvantages of planting are in each one of these different seasons. First, let's discuss spring planting. What are some of the advantages to planting in the spring? I bet as you sit there and think about it, you could come up with some yourself. But first of all, we see an immediate growth response. One of the great things about planting in the springtime is you take a plant, place it in the ground, get it all planted, and it's either going to put on leaves, stems, or even it'll also flower. And that's very rewarding when you're planting in the spring. Secondly, a great advantage to spring planting is that, gosh, it just feels great after a long winter, gray and cold, to get out into the garden and start planting things and seeing that immediate growth response. The third advantage of spring planting is, of course, the fact that most garden centers and retail shops that sell plants are geared up for big sales, and that means they have great availability, a good diversity of selection, and so in your planning, you'll know that you'll have a lot of available plants for you. But believe it or not, even though spring planting sounds so advantageous, there are some disadvantages. Now let's look at those disadvantages. And folks, there are two primary disadvantages. First and foremost, you don't have as much time for root establishment before you get periods of water stress or drought. You see, what happens is by planting in the spring, remember we talked about on last show about the importance of establishment and how establishment takes anywhere from 4 months all the way up to a year, that you have much less time before you have water stress or moisture stress, which is caused by the warm temperatures in May, June, and July. So unless you're managing your water well, you can see this could be a problem. You could hedge your bet by planting at a different time. And of course, the second disadvantage of spring planting is that once that plant is planted, there's a high demand for above ground growth on that plant. The plant's coming out of dormancy, there are long sunny days, oftentimes plenty of moisture, and it's really telling that plant to produce leaves. Oftentimes when you purchase plants, they're budded up and ready to flower, the flowering plants, and as a result there's a big energy demand to supply those flowers with the things they need to open up. All that reduces the ability of those roots to establish themselves. And remember, you've got to have good root establishment for survivability on a long-term basis. Now, fall planting has some significant advantages as well. First advantage is, and I think you probably can think that this would be the case, you have extended period of time for root establishment to occur before periods of moisture stress. When you plant in October and November, now the upper portion of the plant's not having any stimulus to grow at all, but you can still get root growth when plants are dormant. And so by fall planting, you will continue to have good root establishment. And here's the other nice thing. You don't often have to think about watering so frequently, because in November and December and January, the moisture levels, at least in North Carolina, we have plenty of rainfall and snow that we can continue to keep that soil moist and get good establishment. So by the time May and June roll around, folks, you've got a well-established plant, and it's going to be able to withstand that moisture stress a whole lot better. The second advantage of fall planting goes right along with the first one. There's less demand for above ground growth. You don't have any kind of problem with leaves needing to be put out or flowers coming out, a big advantage. But I bet you can already predict what some of the disadvantages of fall planting are. First and foremost, the plant, once planted in the fall, goes dormant right away. Now, can you imagine you just plant a deciduous tree in the landscape, it has leaves on it, those leaves turn color, and then they fall off? Well, you know what? That leads to what we call a fear of failure. How would you like to go ahead and plant a whole landscape full of deciduous trees and shrubs only to have the leaves turn and fall off? You've got to wait until next spring before you find out whether those plants are actually still living or whether they died. This really creates hesitation for fall planting. You don't see an immediate response. And secondly, availability of plants. Garden centers stock well now for fall planting because of the physiological advantages to fall planting, but it's still lagging behind the spring, that psychological aspect. So the way I put it, to conclude, would be psychologically, the best time to plant is in the spring, but physiologically, for the plant's sake, the best time to plant is in the fall. Well, it's fall, and so it's time to plant. So I'm ready to go, and let's talk about the different packaging methods again. You remember in the last show we talked about the 3 basic packaging methods. And I remember I said that we'd talk later about how we treat each different type relative to planting. Well, what we want to talk about first is how to plant B&B, because a B&B plant has a unique packaging method that we need to consider before we actually go ahead and put it in the ground. So let's take a look. Here's the ball of earth that came from the nursery, and it's covered in burlap. Now, folks, the first thing you need to assess when you're planting B&B is this material true burlap? All right? Now, burlap is a cloth, and it's going to rot over time, because everyone wants to know, well, is it important to remove the burlap from the root ball before you plant it? And the answer is, it depends on whether or not this is real burlap. Now, if it's real burlap and it would have this brown, beige-brown color and feel like cloth, then you don't have to take it off completely. But I'll show you what you need to do. But it could be plastic burlap. Now, plastic burlap has a real hard feel to it and it's blue. Or it could be true burlap but treated with an anti-rot chemical, and that would stain this material to a blue color. So, folks, if you see blue color on burlap, remove the burlap completely. But if it's true burlap, you can leave it on. However, before you actually put it in the hole, or once you put it in the hole, let me show you what you need to do. All right, I'm going to take the plant, set it down in the hole before I do anything to the burlap, and make sure it's at the right height. You can see it's on the high side, and that's where you want to have it. And now what's important, even though it's true burlap, you want to go ahead and remove it, get it away from the trunk or away from the stems of the plant. So in this case, this burlap is secured with twine. I'm going to go ahead and cut the twine and loosen it and pull that twine away. Now, it's baling twine. It could stay in the hole, but I'm going to go ahead and just pull it out down there. And now it's real important to go ahead and try to loosen the burlap that's around the plant. There it goes. See? And now, I don't have to remove it, but what I do need to do is take it. You can just stuff it down into the hole. And the further down you go, the better. It's burlap. It's not been treated, so it'll rot. Get it right down there like so. And you see, by doing that, you haven't disturbed the root system at all. And folks, it's really important to make sure you remove the burlap and peel it back when it's down in the hole. You don't touch the burlap until it gets down in the hole. Now you're ready to go ahead and start covering it like so. All right? And just planting it normally. So just remember that you've got to assess whether or not it's real burlap or not and get it down in the hole. Now, you might be wondering, why do I have to wait until it gets down in the hole? Folks, if you start removing the burlap and it's outside of the hole and the soil ball isn't tight and compact but it's quite loose, and you start to remove or peel back that burlap, you could have that root ball break and damage roots. Well, you'd much rather have it be down in the hole so you can secure it, and you begin to go ahead and peel that burlap back, and then you've got the hole with the soil around it to keep it from struggling like that. You won't end up with root damage, so it helps to secure the roots. The other thing is, you've got to make sure that it's not plastic or treated. If it is, then it's got to be removed. Where's the best place to remove the burlap? When the plant's down in the hole. You get it down in the hole, and what I'll do is try to demonstrate pretending that we've got real burlap or treated burlap. Grab the plant, grab the burlap, all right, the treated burlap or the plastic, lift the plant up, and then slowly pull it out. And you see, that way you haven't disturbed the root ball. So that would be the way to get treated burlap or plastic burlap away from the root ball, and so it doesn't stay down in there. Now, we didn't have to do it with this because it's real burlap. But that's basically the technique for B&B plants. Go ahead and fill it in, water it accordingly, and you're ready to go. Well, now let's go ahead and talk about planting bare root plants. Now remember, the only time you'd actually be planting bare root plants is in the very early spring, late winter, when they're dormant. Because remember, a bare root plant, such as this one here, can't survive without soil, moist soil around the roots, any other time except when it's dormant. So remember, if you've purchased them mail order, or if by some chance you can get bare root plants from the garden center, all right, you're ready to go ahead and plant them, here would be the proper technique in late February and early March. Now folks, you can't just take this plant and put it in the soil. You've got to stimulate root growth. And the way you do that is you take the plant and you just submerge it in a bucket of water, just like this, and what the water does is it stimulates plant growth of the roots. Now you put it in there for more than an hour and less than 24. It's got to be more than an hour because that'll help the roots get growing. Less than 24 so the roots don't rot from a lack of oxygen. Well, let's assume that it's been soaking for 3 or 4 hours, and now it's time to take that bare root plant out of the soaking water and place it in the hole, normal spot, again, nice and high, and away we go. Remember, folks, with bare root plants, this is something you're only going to do at the end of the dormant season, the beginning of spring, because that's when these plants are going to make it like that. You don't purchase or deal with bare root plants at any other time during the season. Well, the third group is the plants that are container grown, and by far this is the largest group of plants that we have to select from now. Remember that 100% of the root system is in this container because it was actually grown in a container all its life. So how do we go about planting it? Well, first of all, remember, you can plant this plant anytime you can dig a hole because you have everything self-contained. First thing you want to do with a container grown plant is to try to loosen the plant from the container. And in this case, you just can take it around and bang it, and that'll help to loosen it. Then you grab it at the base and pull up. Now in this case, you can see that a lot of the soil has fallen off. It's not very pot bound, and that's not a bad thing. But folks, take all this soil that the plant was growing in and place it in the hole. And just mix it down in there, set your plant in like so, and go ahead and begin planting it. Now, the one thing you want to remember, and I might have demonstrated this when we planted the tree, is that if the roots are matted around the outside, then it's important to disturb those roots. You take a knife, a sharp instrument, and score that root system. And that's the term we use to make vertical cuts in that particular situation. Now, this plant actually didn't need any scoring at all. It came right out of the pot. We're able to go ahead and plant it and go from there. So that's basically how we approach planting B&B, bare root, and of course the most common, container grown. Make it simple, you can go right after it, it won't be a problem. You know, now we've talked about the specific packaging methods and how to plant them. And in last week's show we discussed how to go about planting in a hole. Let's take a look at a new thought or a new philosophy relative to planting. Folks, maybe we want to start thinking about using or considering the plant bed when we plant. In other words, not just think about a hole where we'd plop a plant down in that hole, but actually think about a whole area where we're going to plant a number of different plants. And then when it comes to the plant bed, we go ahead with our cultivator and we cultivate in amendments that incorporate it into the whole bed as a means by which to create a good environment for planting. Not only that, but when we think about the plant bed, we've got to think about the sunlight exposure and the size and height of the plants relative to its surrounding. Take this bed, for instance. I've already planted a Pieris japonica. It's a Japanese Pieris. It's going to grow about 4 or 5 feet tall and about 3 feet wide. I've already got that in there. This is an area that gets morning sun but afternoon shade. And if you look over here, you see I've got this plant here. This is an oak leaf hydrangea, which is semi-shade tolerant. And I'm going to use that and plant it right in the middle. I think I'm going to put it right here. And then this is another Pieris, another Japanese Andromeda, except this particular plant, the flowers generally come out white. These are actually a reddish flower, and these are the flower buds that will come out next spring. This plant flowers generally in April. And I'm going to flank the oak leaf hydrangea on either side. Now you'll notice that I've placed these plants more toward the back of the bed and not more toward the path. That's because of the size and height that they're going to grow. Now, as a result of having gone and cultivated this bed with my hand cultivator, with that power cultivator, then you don't really have to dig a hole as much as create an impression or a dent in the soil. See if I can show you what I mean. I'm going to go ahead and plant this hydrangea right here. So I'm going to go ahead and come in and dig a little bit. Remember, we're still planting our plants high to ensure good oxygenation of the roots. So I'm not going to go too deep, and I don't have to worry too much about going very wide because the soil's already been cultivated by that cultivator. You see, when you plant with a bed, it tends to work out a whole lot easier. Now, this is a container-grown plant. I'm going to just loosen it up in the container and then gently pull it out, take whatever soil and fertilizer was in the pot, put that over here. Now you can see the roots have grown all the way to the outside, container grown. Remember, we just talked about how it's important to disturb those roots a little bit. Not too much, but in this case, these roots aren't that bad and not too matted, so I'm just taking my hand, because I enjoy doing that, you see, take out a little frustration, get to relax a little bit. You see, I've disturbed the roots, and folks, don't worry about that. That's going to help the plant grow. And I'm going to place it in here like so. Now, it's a little bit too deep, so I'm going to take some soil, put it in here. That raises it up a little bit more. Set it in. Take my hands, just kind of bring it around there. Now, you'll notice I haven't done the classic planting technique that a lot of people do when they plant a plant in. And that is, they worry about making sure that the plant is downright into the soil. So they might come up here with their foot and start tamping the soil down. Well, when you tamp the soil down like that, it just compacts the soil. Not good oxygenation. Folks, the plants aren't going to run away. Just very gently, carefully put that soil around there, and don't worry about tamping it down so tight. Of course, once you finish with a whole bed, then you'd come through with your mulch, put it all through in there, and then come back with your hose. Remember, frequent, moderate waterings. But that's the basic technique. Think about planting in beds and prepare your whole bed. Put your plants in there. Then you can add things like annuals, perennials, without having to worry about preparing the soil. It's a great technique. I highly recommend it. Well, the plants are all in the ground. We're watering them, moderate watering, frequently. Remember, water loss, #1 killer of transplanted trees and shrubs. Now we want to talk about some of the post-transplant care. Folks, before we do that, let me go ahead and encourage you to see about getting your own copy of Extension Successful Gardener. This October issue has a lot of information about selecting trees, but also about common planting mistakes, and gives proper instructions for planting, much of what we've been talking about in these two shows. Well, now, one of the basic post-transplant care for trees especially is this aspect of staking and guying. You know, when we put stakes down to secure the tree. Now, first of all, let's take a look here. You can actually go out and purchase kits now, and I just picked this one up the other day at a local garden center. This is a tree staking kit where you can actually use this kit. It's got all the pieces you need to go ahead and do that. Now, before I show you actually how to do that, let's talk just a little bit about why you'd want to stake or guy a tree that you've just planted. Most people will tell you that the reason why you want to stake this tree is to make it grow straight. Now, folks, think about that for a second. Take a walk out in the woods where no one ever planted a tree or put any stake or guy on the tree, and look at those trees and look how straight they're growing. No, we don't stake and guy the tree in order to make it grow straight. Gravity and the earth will take care of its straight growth. Even if we plant it a little bit crooked, the top will end up going straight. We want to make sure as you plant it straight when you start. No, the primary reason why you would put stakes or guys on a tree like this is to prevent it from blowing over in a wind, or to protect the trunk if you're planting in a turf area for when a lawnmower comes up and it might hit the trunk. In fact, that's called lawnmower blight. Staking and guying protects trees from that and from the wind. Therefore, if the tree is relatively small and not too top heavy, you probably don't need to stake or guy the tree at all. Only those large trees that have small root balls and big canopies really need to be staked, especially during windy times. But that being said, let's talk about the proper way to go about staking or guying a tree. I'm a big fan of guying, and what that means is you would need at least 3 stakes that you would put in the ground, equidistant around. You take the stakes, drive them into the ground, and the key for staking and guying the tree is to what you put around the tree to protect the bark from being cut by the wire or the rope that you're using. Now, in this particular kit, they're using something quite nice. They're using a strap with a seatbelt type of material with 2 grommets. So you would go ahead and place it around the tree like so, and then run your wire through, and then that would secure it. So that works out real well. Now you can home make your own staking and guying kit. You can use old hose, and for years people have used old pieces of hose that come around the tree like so, all right, and then bend. And then that hose material ends up protecting the trunk from the wire, and then you run that guy wire down. You can make your own stakes. But you need 3 of them to keep it straight, and the key is to not have these guy wires too tight. You're not strapping the tree in. What you're doing is you're just providing those wires to protect it during heavy winds. Once again, larger trees need guying and staking, but these smaller trees probably don't, even though we demonstrated it on this particular tree. So think about it before you go just staking and guying a tree. Think about what you're going to do and whether it's really necessary for the sake of that particular tree and how it's going to grow. Well, our plant of the week this week is a great shrub. It's Itea virginica Henry's garnet, the Henry garnet sweetspire, also known as Virginia sweetspire. Now, this plant was recommended to us by Alan Murray out of Tobaccoville, North Carolina. Alan, thanks very much for your comments and the suggestion for this plant. We'll be sure to send you an In the Garden t-shirt. Folks, don't forget to send in your suggestions, and if we use them on the air like Alan did, we'll send you a free In the Garden t-shirt. Well, now let's talk about Itea. Itea is a shrub. It's a deciduous shrub that grows about 3 to 4 feet tall, but spreads out about 5 to 6 feet. Now, folks, keep in mind, also with that spread, you can often get even more spreading as a result of something we call root suckers. These are underground roots that pop up new stems, and if you look right down here, you can see one of them popping up even outside on the outside edge of the pot. Okay, so this is a kind of a plant you want to put in an area where you don't have anything else and you can allow it to spread. You might say, well, why would I be concerned about it spreading and why would I let it have that much space? Well, here's the deal with Itea. In the spring, about mid-April, depending on where you are in North Carolina, it could be a little bit earlier, could be a little bit later, this plant produces beautiful white flowers that hang down. They're fragrant. They attract bees and other insects. It's a beautiful, graceful effect on this particular plant. Well, that's not the only reason. This plant also in the fall develops absolutely beautiful garnet red fall color, and that's where Henry's garnet, that name, comes from. Now, the leaves haven't changed on this particular plant yet, but boy, when they do in a full sun location, this just lights up the landscape. It's wonderful. Now, culturally, full sun to a little bit of shade, it'll tolerate a little bit of shade. The great news about this plant is if you have a low area that stays moist, this particular plant will tolerate wet soils, but it'll also grow in dry soils. All right? It's a fabulous plant to put in a shrub border. Remember, though, to give it plenty of room so it can spread. All right? And maybe as an accent plant. But I really appreciate Alan's suggestion of Itea virginica Henry Garden as our plant of the week. Thanks very much. Well, folks, we're about out of time for this show, and so until next week, I'll be looking for you in the garden.
To register for In the Garden, the course, call NC State's Distance Education Program at 1-866-GO-STATE. That's 1-866-467-8283. Or log on to distance.ncsu.edu. For more information about the program or to suggest a plant of the week, go to unctv.org/inthegarden.
Funding for In the Garden is provided by UNC TV members and by academic programs and North Carolina Cooperative Extension. Both are members of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at North Carolina State University.